Hi, welcome to the training webinar for this week. I'm Dale Franks. You may have noticed that the training webinar that we are having today, based on the splash screen that was showing before the webinar started, is not the webinar originally scheduled for today. Yesterday, I got a tech support ticket from a customer, and I'm sort of tickled to see, Michelle, that you are here as an audience member, because it was from your organization, asking about how to create feedback apps. I've never covered that before, and since I'm always looking to do new things, I decided that I would preempt the rather boring and beginner level basic webinar that was scheduled for today on overviewing all of the form controls in the online form designer, and replace it with this because it is new. And it actually, hi Pierre, how are you? I see you. This is for you. Basically, we now have the customers here who asked about this yesterday, and now it is the training webinar. So I postponed all of the webinars that were originally scheduled for this week and next week and so forth, so that we could talk about building feedback apps today. And so without further ado, let's get in and start talking about how we would build a feedback app. Now, we actually do have feedback apps that we use here at BP Logix. For example, if we go to our training, or our product documentation, on the bottom of every documentation page, there is a Send Feedback to BP Logix button, which when you click it, actually opens up a process director form on training.bplogix.net, where you can, tell me that I have a typo on a certain page, or there's something missing, or you need a clarification about something. So we have this documentation feedback. So it's not unusual to have a documentation feedback app. But the problem is that documentation feedback apps come in a variety of flavors, and the implementation can be different depending on what you want to do with them. Now, there is a Q&A process. We have talked about this process before. I think probably the last time might have been sometime in 2024 where we covered this. But this is a type of feedback application. It's not really a feedback application, although it follows the same principles. This is a Q&A application. Let me show you what I mean. So I have this form here. I don't have a process timeline or anything associated with it. In a few minutes, when we start building a feedback app, we'll go down here and look at this folder, and we'll start building out the app. And it does have a form and a timeline, and we'll discuss some of the wrinkles with that in a little bit. But let me go to a form instance of my parent form. So theoretically, this parent form is running in its own process. And for the purposes of this particular app, what I have done is I have added in the ability to ask questions about a submission. And so as you can see, I asked a couple of questions this morning. Does it do things? Should it? Both of which were answered yes. And now I have another question pending. What if I don't like it? And I can click on this and it will open up a question and answer form. And I can just answer too bad and put a period there. And I can now answer the question. And once the question has been answered, I'm now back onto the initial submitter, because I am both the asker and the answerer of this question. So we're now back to the requester, which again is me. And okay, fine, I've got my answer. What if I don't like it? Too bad. So I guess I'm done. So I'll click the done button here. And as you can see, this question is no longer an outstanding question. And if I refresh my past Q&A correspondence, that third question has now moved over here. Now, this is a example of a type of feedback, although it's not really giving direct feedback to somebody else. It's actually kind of an internal feedback to ask and answer questions. But this principle we can extend to doing a whole bunch of different things in terms of how we want a feedback to work. So what I want to do to start off with is just cover how this thing is constructed. And then we're going to go ahead and build a feedback app. Now, it won't be the Q&A app. We're going to build a more basic feedback app because, we are constrained on time. However, with that in mind, let's look and see how this works. In this particular instance, I didn't mean to open the form instance. I meant to open the form. Now, in this particular instance, this type of feedback app requires a connection to the main application. That's not always the case. Some feedback apps, you don't care if they're connected to the main app. In this case, we do. And actually, there are probably some things that if you're going to do any sort of feedback app, that you want to use to connect the feedback to whatever the original form instance or process instance it is that invoked the feedback from the user. Now, in this case, the feedback is actually a bunch of questions and answered. So I've got a fairly complex thing that I have to do here. Like I said, we'll cover this briefly, and then we're going to go and build something maybe a little bit simpler and something that hopefully we'll have some time to play around with and do a couple of different things in terms of how we want it to work in conjunction with our main process. In this case, we actually want this Q&A app to work intrinsically with our main process. We want to track it both in our main process as well as the independent process that runs the Q&A application that's associated here. So our primary linkage is this field right here. This is the sequence number field. We always recommend that you have a field that has a unique request number in it. Now, in this case, all I've done is just slapped a sequence number on here. So there's a set form data that just sets the value of this field to a sequence number. And it's not even a unique sequence number. It's just a generic sequence number system variable that just generates a self-incrementing integer every time it's invoked. And I have it built into the form itself. Normally we wouldn't do this. And whenever we go and look at our webinar thing and we start rebuilding it, we'll do it a little bit differently. But I need this sequence number because what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this sequence number off to the Q&A form so that I have that link between the parent request number and the question for the request number so that they're linked together with that unique identifier for each request. And that's why we always recommend, by the way, so that we can do things like this, that you have a unique request number for every request that's submitted, every form that is submitted in your system. So in this case, it is a little more complex because I have to have two knowledge views, one that shows me the questions that are currently being asked and that have not yet been answered. And then I have my past questions, all of the questions that have been asked and answered about this particular form. The important part that makes it work, and the part that makes any feedback process work, is that we have to be able to invoke the run process custom task to configure it and to kick it off to run our feedback, whatever it is. So I've got a button here called Ask a Question. And it is that button which is going to invoke our Q&A process. So let's look at our Q&A process, because that's really all that we have on the form that makes this work. Well, actually, we will have to go back to the form and look at the configuration of that, but of how we're invoking the run process custom task. But for now, let's take a look at the Q&A process itself. It's not all that difficult. I have two knowledge views, one that shows my outstanding questions, those questions that I have asked but have not yet been answered, and then all past Q&A correspondence. So this would be all of the questions that have been asked about the parent form. There's an email template that we don't really need to look at. The Q&A process form, there's nothing big about it. We actually saw it briefly just a minute ago. It has just a few form fields on it, the most important of which is the sequence number field, which is what is going to link our parent form to all of our child forms where we're asking questions about this process. And I am, of course, whoever the timeline initiator is, I'm automatically filling out this user picker with the initiator's ID, and I'm automatically filling out the question date. So these are basically just fields that have the default values already set. So the question asked by is the form submit user. The question date is the form submit date. So the only three fields that need to be filled out is this user picker here. Who am I going to ask this question to? And what is my question? In fact, when you ask the question, you don't even see this answer field. Why would you? There is no answer yet. Only the person who has asked the question will see this answer field. It will appear whenever their answer question task is running. So it's a real simple form. And the truly important thing about it is having this sequence number field here that I'm going to have to pass the sequence number of the parent's form to each instance of this child form. The timeline itself is also super simple. When we invoke the run process custom task, the process starts, and when the process starts, it then creates the associated form. So if we go to the options for this process timeline, we can see that the Q&A process form is the form for timeline, and that thing here in parentheses will attach form instance if needed is super important, because I am going to be invoking the process timeline. Normally we invoke a process timeline by submitting a form. And so the form exists first, and then the timeline exists when it's created, when the form is submitted. That's what invokes the creation of the timeline instance. When you use the run process custom task, the exact opposite occurs. The timeline gets created and begins running. The timeline will first, as it starts, look for a form that it needs to associate with itself so that it knows what form it has to show end users. End users can't just look at timeline instances. They can't do anything with timeline instances. They have to have a UI to interact with that timeline. That UI is the form. And so now we're starting the timeline itself off de novo before the form exists. And so we have to do two things to make this work. First, of course, we invoke the timeline. The timeline then creates the form instance that will be associated with it, since one doesn't exist whenever it starts. And then we have to assign a task to the person who kicks off the feedback, in this case, the person who is asking the question. So I have an ask question activity. This is assigned to the timeline initiator. They ask the question, they submit the form, it then goes to the person who they've decided to ask a question of, and that person then is assigned the answer question task. When they have answered the question, then another task is assigned to the timeline initiator, the user who asked the question, to let them know that it has been answered. So they now have a task in their task list that says, hey, your question has been answered. What do you want to do now? They can then open the question. There's, as we saw previously, there's a done button they can click that completes their task. That ends the entire question process, and we're finished. But do note that because we're invoking the timeline first, we don't actually have a form submitter. So the first thing we need to do is find someone to assign that task to as the submitter. And that's why we're assigning it to the timeline initiator, because the person who clicks the Ask a Question button on the main form, they're the ones who invoked the process timeline. Thus, they are the timeline initiator. For them to provide their feedback, or in this case, to ask their question, they need to be assigned the very first task in that process timeline so that they can ask their question or provide their feedback, whatever the case may be. So this is how it all runs. And the important piece of this starts off when you click that Ask a Question button, because that invokes the Run Process Custom task. We're going to run through the configuration on this real quick. Then I'm going to build this thing from scratch, and we'll get into the weeds about how all this works. And we'll talk about some different scenarios for how you want a feedback form to work. In this case, I want to do a couple of things. Obviously, I want to launch my Q&A timeline so that people can ask and answer questions. I'm going to need to also identify the new form. Now, if I did not identify a form here, it wouldn't matter. The form would still be associated with the new instance of the Q&A timeline. So it would create a version of the process form. The reason that I need to do this in this specific case and choose that new form is that I need to be able to map the sequence number field on the Q&A process form. I need to fill it out with the value in the corresponding field, which is just called SEQnum, again, abbreviation for sequence number, on the main form. And so I need to match these two forms so that I can pass the sequence number from the main form to this form, which is essentially a subform, if you want to think of it that way. There's no array binding, so I don't care about that. On the Advanced tab, there are a couple of things that I do care about. This checkbox right here is super important. In my case, I have decided that and this is the default. The default is that the Launch as Sub-Process of Current Process button or checkbox is checked. That's the default in Process Director. In this case, I want that to be true because I want to be able to track all of the questions with the parent process as well. That means that this process that I'm invoking is going to launch as a sub-process. Now, I don't have it on the main form for this example, but the thing about sub-processes is that when I start playing around with routing slips, and I place a routing slip on my main form, I have the option to track not only the main process, but any associated sub-processes. So in this case, I want to, on my routing slip, or at least have the option on my routing slip, to track all of the questions that are asked as part of the sub-process, so that when I'm looking at my routing slip, I can see who asked questions and who answered questions and when those questions were asked and answered. I can track that on my routing slip as part of the main process, should I choose to do so. Technically, I could have a separate routing slip that only tracked the sub processes. So this gives me a lot of options if I launch it as a sub process. That is what I want to do in this case, but it may not be always. So when we rebuild it, we're going to have to come back and take a longer look at this checkbox to talk about what the implications of checking and unchecking it are. On the after process starts, now I have a lot of options. I believe the default, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I believe the default is keep original form open after starting process. So by default, what happens whenever you invoke a process with the run process custom task is that it happens in the background. Now you'll get your email notification. You'll get a task notification in the task list, in either case, if you're assigned a task in that sub process. But it won't interfere with the main process. The main process will just keep rolling along. For feedback forms, that is not generally what we want to happen. What we usually want to happen if we're going to invoke a feedback is for the feedback to appear right then and there so they can start working on it. So it's important that the after process starts, you change that so that we are sure that it opens that task from a new process in a new window, so that as soon as the user clicks the, in this case, the ask a question button, I want that question form to appear. You know, I didn't even invoke it whenever we looked at it. So we'll go back and look at it here in a second. All the rest of the stuff I don't care much about. Usually for feedback type forms, we don't really care much about attachments. We don't need to pass attachments back and forth. We certainly don't in this case. We're just asking questions. In a feedback form, it's generally just a series of, statements to the developer or whoever the feedback form is going to. So we generally don't care about attachments. So therefore, we don't have to worry about the attachments or the advanced tab. We don't usually worry about array binding either, because what that will do is launch a process for each row in the array. That's certainly not something we usually want to do in a feedback process. So really, what we care about are the launch data, new form, and advanced tabs up at the very top. And that's all the configuration we really need to do. Even here on the advanced forms, we don't really care about changing the default options. Everything really works the way that we want it to out of the box, except for how we want to handle after the process starts and whether we're going to map anything from one form to the other. So with this setup now, if I were to go back to my form instance and open it again and decided I wanted to ask another question, ideally what happens is I click the button, and when I do, the form opens. There we go. So now I've got my ask a question form. I haven't left my parent form, but I now have my, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. I just meant to move it. I now have my ask a question form, and I can go ahead and ask the question that I need to ask of whoever I need to ask it to. As you can see, the only two things that I really need to fill out here, although I do need to disable that field, it looks like, that the only thing I need to do is just ask my question. And once I submit that question, assuming I can type it correctly, I'll click the Ask the Question button. And now I'm done. I've asked my question, provided my feedback. Now I have to swap hats. I am now the answerer of the question. So I'm now obligated to provide the answer to this question. I can't even submit the form, as you can see with this big red bar over here. It's not even going to let me submit the form unless I answer that question. I'm just going to go ahead and close it without saving, however, so that we can come back and look at our form and we can see that Dale Franks has asked Dale Franks another question. And so at some point, I'm going to either have to click on the link in the email notification I receive, which I didn't actually show you, but since we're here, I might as well turn Outlook. Well, I don't actually know if it'll send me an email. Now that I think about it, I may have turned those emails off. Did I? It appears that I did not. So here is my email notification. So for me as the question answerer, I can, click here to answer the question, which will open up this questions form for me. On my task list, I have a task assigned to me to answer the question. It works just like a normal task. And once I've answered the question, it will move from the left to the right over here to join my past Q&A correspondence. So that's a working version of it. Let's go ahead and create our own feedback form from scratch. And we're not going to worry about the Q&A stuff and how to follow that. If you want a copy of how the Q&A process works, that's fine. Drop me an email at dale.franks@bplogix.com and I'll send you a zipped up copy of that and you can play with that. But let's just build one from scratch and let's just build a normal feedback form where we don't have to worry about back and forth and all of that other stuff. And we have a lot of options in the way that we build it. So I've got my main webinar form and webinar timeline. We don't really care much about what's on either of these two things, except for that sequence number. We are probably going to want that sequence number. So I do need to add that on the webinar form. Right now, the form is entirely blank. So I am just going to drop in an input control here that I'm just going to call request number. And for a feedback form, it may be that some or all of the fields are irrelevant, and so you don't care about passing them. But there may be some value that you do want to pass from the form. So that's another option, another wrinkle. Let's at least give ourselves the option of doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and label this request number. We're not going to get too detailed about formatting here. And the value we need for some reason. And I shouldn't hit cap lock, should I? And we're just going to drop in another text box here and we can play with it a little bit later. We'll come back to it. And we'll just call this past value. So we'll pass the past value whenever we need it. The important part is this. In general, now this is not universally true, but in general, when you pass a feedback, you at least want some connection to the main form, even if you don't care about whether the feedback is actually a sub-process of the main process. You at least need some reference to be able to find the main form if you need to. And the simplest way to do that is to have a request number. Now, there are other things that you can pass. There are obviously system variables for grabbing the form instance ID. So technically you could pass the form instance ID. And as an implementer, at least, you could always find the form instance ID and display it. I mean, technically, it's possible to pass a URL as a link. There are a number of different ways that we can do this. The simplest way is to make it a sub-process, but I can understand why you might not want to do that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I think we're fine with our form as is. Now, in this parent form here, there is no process or anything, so I went ahead and just added the sequence number whenever the form opens, or whenever the form is created. So every time the form is created, it burns a sequence number. That's probably not what you want to do in this case. Normally, it's difficult to think of a time, although I suppose it's possible, It's difficult to think of a time whenever you would submit feedback or ask a question, whatever your feedback app does, before the form has been submitted. Usually, you're going to provide feedback after the initial submission. I suppose that might not be universally true, but I think it's generally true. If you want to allow people to ask for or to provide feedback on unsubmitted forms, that becomes a little trickier nut to crack because I don't really have anything. I don't know that that form is ever actually going to be real. When I open up a new form instance before I submit it, it's kind of in a limbo of existence. It doesn't really exist. Yeah, it automatically gets a form instance ID associated with it. But what happens if I don't submit that form? Well, that form instance ID all just goes away. It all disappears. Before a form is submitted, it lives in this weird, it kind of exists and kind of doesn't exist limbo. And in general, we treat unsubmitted forms as if they are not fully real because we can't depend on them. One of the reasons why we don't recommend that you create sequence numbers on form creation is that you don't know if that form is going to get submitted. And if it doesn't, it burns your sequence number. And in this case, if you let people provide feedback before the form is submitted, that form may not exist. I mean, it's technically possible that they could submit the feedback and then not submit the form. So now you have feedback for a form that doesn't exist and it's just sort of out there orphaned. And so whenever you look at the feedback, you don't really have a parent object to relate back to that might make the feedback have some sense. So I don't know that it's a great practice to allow people to put feedback in on an unsubmitted form. But I am going to need a feedback button. So I'm going to drop a button control on here. Button, there it is, button. All right, we're going to call this feedback button. And we're going to go to the field properties. And I'm going to set the display option. And I'm just going to say field is hidden when, and I'm going to say I don't want it shown when new form instance equals true. So field is hidden when new form instance equals yes. I'm going to make it otherwise visible. This may not be perfect here because do I want people to provide feedback after this process is complete? Maybe I do. And if I do, then this will be fine because one main consideration is when do I want them to initially have the ability to provide feedback? The other question is, when do I want to conclude the ability to provide feedback? If they can provide feedback, as long as it's not a new form instance, they can provide feedback even after the process is complete. If that's fine, then I don't need to worry about how to stop them from doing so. Otherwise, I'm going to have to come in here and I'm going to have to say this field is also hidden when, and I think probably the easiest thing to do for this, if I want to only have this feedback available while the process is running, is I would just go to timeline status equals complete, and then I want the field hidden. So if it's a new form instance, I don't show it. Or if the timeline status is complete, I'm going to hide it again. So what that means is that I can only submit feedback after I've initially submitted the form and before the process completes. So you do have to think about both when you want the user to start and when you want the user to not have the ability to provide feedback. I think I'm happy with feedback being continuous. And so I'm going to go ahead and erase that second one. So as long as it is not a new form instance, I'm going to go ahead and let the user provide feedback. I obviously should configure the button, and just for, completion's sake, I'll go here and I will pick an icon. So I want the icon to be white because I'm going to color the button. And what's a good feedback icon? Uh, I could sit here and look at this for days. We don't have that time. So I'll just throw on a person icon there, and I will set the back color of my button to 082F4D, and I'll make that a dark blue button. Obviously, if you want to add some confirmation text here that will throw up a confirmation dialog box before the button action is invoked, you can do that. All the normal, button configuration stuff applies here. But for now, I think that's all we really have to worry about with our main form. And I clicked the wrong button. I wanted to save and close, and all I ended up doing was saving it. Okay, well, now let's save and close again. And we'll wait for our spinny to stop. And there we go. Now we can move on. I have to make a change to my timeline. I've got activity 1 here. It's just 3 activities that I slapped together. I'm just going to go to activity 1, and I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to set the sequence number on my main form. So I'm going to set this to a custom task. I'm going to go to the custom task and pick set form data. I'm going to add that custom task. My container form is obviously going to be my webinar form, and I'm just going to configure my set form data when it finally decides to appear. To request number, and I'm just going to make this super simple and just set it to a generic sequence number. And I will rename my first activity set where'd I go? SEQ in NIM NUM. So that's generally what I do for setting sequence numbers. Now, I'm not going to set a sequence number unless I'm actually running in a process timeline instance. That way I don't burn a sequence number before somebody submits the form, as I've explained many times. As I've also explained many times, I don't have to actually have this first activity. I do it to make it more obvious what I'm doing, but technically, I could just create it here in the set form data tab, where I could just use the set form data when the activity begins, and I don't have to set a separate timeline activity. I tend not to do this because it hides where you're setting the sequence number, and I would prefer to make it more obvious just as a best practice. As a practical matter, it's probably more efficient if you just do a set form data on whatever the very first activity is in your process timeline, and it'll just set that sequence number. You just have to know that you have to go into the set form data tab to see where that sequence number is being set. Whereas if I set it as an activity, it's very obvious to anybody who opens up the timeline what's happening. But that's all I care about on my main process. Now let's talk about invoking the sub process. First of all, I don't want to do that. I want to save this. Thank you. Okay, first of all, I'm going to need a process. Whatever my feedback process is, I need that. So I am going to create a new folder where I'm going to store my feedback process. Now, excuse me. In this case, I'm creating it as a subfolder of the webinar folder. But this really can be, depending on how you want to create it, this really can be an independent sub process, which means it's a callable sub process. I can call it from any process, and therefore I can provide feedback for any process. So I don't want you to get the impression, even though it looks like it because of the way it's organized here, that I have to create an individual feedback process for every main process. That's not true. I really only need one feedback process. Just like for this Q&A thing up here, this Q&A process is really an independent process that I can call from any other running process in the system. Now, obviously, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to need the parent form to have the appropriate knowledge used. It does get a little more complex, but technically, this is a freestanding process. I mean, I could invoke it without having a parent form at all, just as you could with any feedback process. So in this instance, we are going to create it as a subfolder of webinar, but in the real world, we wouldn't do that. In the real world, this feedback process would probably be a freestanding process that I could invoke from anywhere. And because I can invoke it from anywhere, that's going to have some implications for our configuration when we go back to the webinar form and we we configure the run process custom task on our button click. Now, we can't do that yet because we do not, in fact, have a feedback process. So we should get on with creating it. So there is our feedback process that we are creating. And now I'm going to need the normal things that I need for a basic process. I am going to need let's create the timeline first. So we'll create a process timeline and we'll call it the feedback TL. And we'll hit OK. We're not going to do anything with it yet. So we're just going to OK our way out of it. And then we will create a new form definition and we'll call it the feedback form. And the reason I created the timeline first rather than the form first is that whenever I create the feedback form and I invoke it, it is going to want to take me directly to the online form designer. So here we are in the online form designer. There is one thing that I'm going to need to make that link, and I am going to need that sequence number field. And I should actually make this very clear. This is the parent sequence number. And so I am going to call this parent sequence number as my field name. I may or may not want this field. This is where it starts getting complex. What am I doing with my feedback form? What is my intent for it? Is my intent to associate a feedback form with a parent form of some kind? Now, it doesn't matter which parent form it is because this is a callable sub process, but is that what I really want to do? Or am I more interested in just having a generic feedback so that people can just provide a generic feedback. Maybe they don't like the way something looks or they're confused about something. Maybe I don't want it connected with a parent. I can conceive of a generic feedback, but I think that is pretty rare. For example, let's go to our BP Logics documentation website. So I want to send feedback. Let's not do it on this page. Let's just pick just some random page somewhere here. So here's installing process director. So I'm going to go ahead and submit my feedback. So I'm going to enter my email address. And topics information is useful to me, but I hate the color. I hate blue. Make everything green. Okay, that's feedback, and I'm going to go ahead and submit it. Now, from my perspective, receiving feedback, these two fields, the email address and I hate blue, make everything green, is probably okay as a generic complaint because you don't like that we have a bluish color scheme corporately for BP Logics. Okay, I get it. None of your business, but I mean, I get it. But if I'm saying that, hey, you misspelled director, you left out the E in process director, so it's process director, or director. I'm not sure how you would pronounce that. Okay, well, fine. It's great that I have a that you caught a typo, but I kind of need more information than that. I'm sorry, I'm trying to turn my email back on. So when I receive that feedback, which I should be getting in just a second, there we go. There's my documentation feedback. I need some information. And the important thing that I really need is this topic URL. I need to know where this feedback comes from. If the feedback is there's a typo in director, or you misspelled this, or whatever it may be, it's kind of helpful to know where that is. It gives me the context of where the feedback is coming from. So even with a sort of generic feedback of I just don't like blue, it offends me for some aesthetic reason. Okay, fine. In that case, this isn't all that important. But in almost every other case where this is wrong, this needs to be fixed, there's a typo, I need to know where it is. And so I've got that link that tells me what topic this came from. Now, this is all hidden from the end user. They don't see that I see this whenever a documentation feedback has been submitted, but I do, and that tells me where to go. And it also tells me what page to open up. Installation overview. That's the page that I need to open up in Madcap Flare to make whatever change I need to make to the documentation on that particular page. So I think I default to I need a sequence number or some other link. It could be the sequence number. It could be the form instance ID of the parent form, which you could pass. I generally tend not to like playing around with GUIDs, but that's certainly an option. But I'm going to need to be able to pass that into my form so that at least I have a reference and know where I can find the parent form, even if I don't link to it directly. Since we're not going to do a question and answer form because that's a little more complex and it's already almost 11 o'clock, I am just going to add my feedback field and I'll just drop in a text field and okay, I'll make it a multi-line text box and I'll give it, let's say, 60 columns in size. So there we go. There's my feedback field. Form is going to be ugly, but it will work. So I have my parent sequence number and my feedback. So this is the minimum that I need to make a feedback application work. And I'm just going to call this particular form field feedback, not feedbacks, but feedback. There we go. So now I have a feedback form of some type. I'm going to save and close it. And while it does that, have a sip of coffee. And then I'm going to make my association between my form and my timeline. That's not the one that I wanted to grab. It's the feedback timeline because this is the feedback form. And I will make the timeline association, not particularly necessary in this case, but best practice that we do so. I'll hit OK there. Then I'll go back to my timeline. Now that I have a form, I've got to at least set my form for timeline. Technically, I should create a default email template. If we have time, we'll do it. Otherwise, just understand that normally we would have such a feedback form. I'm just going to update my timeline to save my linkage to my form. And now I can create whatever activities I need to create for my feedback. Now, I should point out once again, this is super important. We are going to be invoking this timeline directly from our parent object. And so it's super important that we have that feedback form associated with the process timeline. I've noticed a lot of times people don't do that. Oh, they're fine going to the form. And on the form, they're always sure to, automatically start this process. People tend to be rather less interested in setting up the timeline association, although it's often very useful. But I'll often see, okay, I'm sure to fill this out so that when I submit this form, it kicks off the proper timeline. That's kind of self-enforcing because if you don't set that, no timeline gets kicked off and it's kind of obvious that something is wrong. This is not self-enforcing. I mean, unless you're doing a lot of timeline based conditions, this really doesn't affect your work. And most of the time, because we're invoking a timeline from a form, a lot of people don't fill this out. But in this case, it is super important that you fill it out because we need to have this webinar form associated with the timeline so it creates an instance when the timeline gets created because we are doing things. That's the webinar timeline. Oh, I opened up the wrong one. Feedback timeline. Um, Same caveats apply. I just happen to be looking at the wrong timeline. So we really need that feedback form set. Now we are going to create the activities. I don't know what the feedback activities are. There's obviously something that needs to be assigned to somebody. I'm gonna create an activity. This is assigned. It's going to be assigned to the timeline initiator because I am the timeline initiator. Um, but also because in the real world, I do need to assign feedback to the timeline initiator because he has to fill out the form. Remember, the form is blank. It just gets attached whenever the process starts. So in the real world, the very first thing I need to do is assign a task to the timeline initiator, which is to show him the form so that he can fill out his feedback. Once they have added that feedback, and I'm just going to go ahead and call this add feedback. And I'm going to give it a single result too. And we'll just call it submit feedback. Yes, technically I should go here and set colors and text and icons. In the interest of time, I'm not going to do that in this particular case, but normally you'd do that. So I've got add feedback. Then we have to figure out what you want to do with that feedback. Now, in the Q&A process, I have to have some interactivity. So if I'm going to, as the submitter of a question, if I'm going to ask somebody a question, they're going to need to be assigned a task to answer that question. And I'm going to need to be assigned another task as the submitter of the question to see that it has been answered. So I get my email notification that it's been answered. I get a task assignment. Basically, I'm trying to force the submitter to open up and clear that task off of their timeline by saying that I am done with my question. Feedback is going to operate a little bit differently, and there are a number of different things. Do you want to assign a feedback to a person so that they can perhaps provide a response? Are you just gathering feedback? Again, if we go back over here to our documentation feedback, once I submit this form as an end user, nothing else happens. I'm never going to see a task. I mean, quite honestly, I don't really know submitting this form if anybody is ever going to see it. I can assure you that someone will, and well, someone's will, and I am one of those someones who will see it. But you don't get any feedback as a user. You just provide your one-time feedback and you hit submit and it goes off into the ether and whatever happens, happens. In my case, the thing that happens is that it sends me an email. It doesn't even assign me a task. There's no task notification or anything. It just gives me a notification that there is a feedback and it provides me all of the information as we saw in the email. And the only real link to the feedback, the only real link that I need is the link to the original web page where the feedback came from. And once I have that, I know where to look and I do whatever it is that I need to do. So in this case, this feedback is a simple notification in Process Director, and it doesn't do anything else. In fact, we'll just hit OK here. We'll save that. And we'll go up here to documentation. And actually, we won't even do that. Feedback. That's what we'll do. We'll just go to documentation feedback and we'll look at my feedback process. And this is it. There is a feedback notification. And I think at this point, it only goes to me. It usually goes to me and my boss, but I've removed my boss because my boss is now the CEO. So there's some changes that are coming. So for now, I am not going to bother the CEO with everybody's documentation feedback. So this is just going to go to me. And that's it. That's a perfectly valid feedback. Now, in the real world, whenever we're trying to do feedback from inside Process Director, because remember, this is just coming from an external website. So there is no interaction with Process Director. So this level of simplicity works just fine. In the real world, however, I am probably going to be, I don't want to make any changes to this. In the real world, I'm probably going to need to have some extra links from my main process to whatever is providing the feedback. So What comes after feedback, I'm not sure. It may just be a notification activity where you just notify somebody and you provide their feedback to them in an email, in which case we will need to create the email template. Or it may, as in the case of the Q&A app, require some sort of response. And if that is so, then I'm going to need an activity from whoever receives the feedback to provide that response. Let's assume that we need to do that. So we're just going to create a user activity, and I'll just assign it to timeline initiator, which will be me. Um, I'm going to turn the notifications off because they're really irksome. I'd have to clean up 30, 40, 50 notifications after a webinar, but I'm probably going to have to come back and turn them on whenever we run this thing just to see the process work. And I'm just going to make activity 2 dependent on activity 1. I guess I'll call this receive feedback, and I guess I'll give it the task instructions of review the feedback received from a user. So I have task instructions that are associated with this task. Technically, I should have task instructions associated with add feedback, but well, we'll let that go for now. So I now have a feedback process, but you're going to have to think about what your feedback process looks like, how long it's going to last, who's going to participate, or whether there are any participants. Well, there will always be one. You will always have to have the add feedback activity, even if all you're providing is an email notification, just like the document feedback does. You're still going to need the timeline initiator to have an activity assigned to them because they have to fill out the form or you don't have a feedback to process. So whatever the processing steps are for your feedback don't really matter in the context that we're discussing now, but it does matter that you have add feedback. Your initial user has to be able to submit it because of the way that we're invoking it. So I have a feedback process. I've got the two big pieces. I've got my parent process where I'm going to be asking for feedback, and I have a feedback process that I can call. So now let's go back to our main form. And let's go back to custom task event mapping. I already have my feedback button on the form. We already created that. So now we need to talk about the run process custom task and how we're going to invoke that. Where am I looking at? Process. There it is. Run process. Wow. Alphabets. How do they work? Okay, so let's find our feedback button as our event. There we go. We have a feedback button, and now we have to configure the run process custom task. So, some things to think about. Obviously, we have to choose the process that we're going to start. So, we are going to go into, well, training webinar, feedback apps, webinar, feedback process, and feedback timeline. So there we go. Now we have the timeline that we are going to start. We're going to want to make our connection between the sequence numbers. So we are going to have to, once again, hook up our form here, our feedback form. And now we can add the one field mapping we need, which is our parent sequence number with our request number on the main form. Now, also note that I do have that oh, I didn't put it on the destination control. On the source control, I have that passed value and I created it, but on the feedback form, I didn't create the value that I want passed between the forms. I don't guess it's important. We're already passing a sequence number value. So the principle is the same. If I have a field in my parent form that can accept values from, or if I have a field in my parent form that can pass values to the feedback form, then I can do that. I can do that mapping there. I just neglected to make a value to pass in my child form. That's okay. We're doing it with the sequence number already, so I don't need to demonstrate the same principle multiple times, I don't guess. Okay, great. So far, so good. As I said earlier, we're just providing feedbacks. So, do we care about attachments? Nah. Um, do we care about changing this? Maybe and maybe not. Now, this is where things start to get murky because what we do here and what we do on this advanced tab are going to be closely related. By default, these are the default settings. Process Director is going to want to do a couple of things whenever I invoke any sort of subform or sub-process. A, it's going to want to treat it as a sub-process of the main process. And we're going to have to back out here and go back to our main form in a second to take a look at what some of our options are if we do that. Whenever I create or whenever I run the lunch process, if it runs it as a sub-process, well, it's always going to run it as a child process. So here's where things get murky. When I refer to a sub-process, I'm referring to a specific kind of thing. I'm referring to a process that is linked directly to a main process as part of that process. Now, because I'm launching it from the run process custom task, I would consider it an asynchronous sub-process, which is to say it runs independently of how the main timeline runs. There are two types of sub-processes. Synchronous, where when I invoke the sub-process, the main process stops and waits until the sub-process is complete before moving forward. And then there are asynchronous sub-processes, where the sub-process is invoked, but the main process continues operating as normally, and it is not dependent on whether the sub-process completes for the main process to complete. Anytime that you invoke the run process custom task, you are launching an asynchronous sub-process if this button is checked. But not all child processes are sub-processes. So when I refer to a child process, I might be referring to a sub-process, but I might also be referring simply to a process that was invoked by some parent process. It may not be part of the parent process. I may not need to track it as part of the parent process. So our first decision is, are we making this a sub-process or a child process? Our second decision is a little bit easier. By default, when I create a child process, it's going to do two things. It's going to, wait a second. Yeah, here it is. Attach new form as, attach new form to parent process. It's also going to attach the parent form to the child process. So I'm going to have a reference from the parent form on the child process and from the child process back to the parent process. Do I want that to happen? Maybe, maybe not. Um, so I might want to turn those buttons off, and I might want to turn that button off so that this process that I launch is completely independent of the parent process. If I do want to associate, so again, now we're talking about decisions that are only going to affect you as the process manager, the designer. Do I want to add the extra references to these feedback process back to my parent process? And do I want to track those child processes as a sub process? So let's go back and look at our main form. We'll just hit OK here. And let's go back and look at something on the main form. I didn't drop this in earlier. I suppose I should have, but we'll do it now. I am going to drop in my button area control because we always have the button area control appear before we drop in a routing slip control. That way, if I have a long process here, I'm not going to force my users to scroll all the way to the bottom of the routing slip before they can access their action buttons. I want them to be able to do their action buttons first and then optionally scroll down through the routing slip if they need to or want to. So on my routing slip, there is a default option checked here that's super important, which is show sub processes. By default, we assume that the most likely use case for invoking either the run process custom task, or if you want to do it synchronously, creating a process activity in your process timeline, which will invoke a synchronous sub-process. But in either case, we're going to assume that you want to track those sub-processes. So that button that we just saw, that little checkbox, create this process as a sub-process, means that by default, in your main process, if you start looking through the routing slip, so in this case, we're talking about a feedback form, right? So somebody invokes the feedback form. So by default, the invocation of that feedback form is now going to show up on your main form's routing slip. So if I have 30 different users putting in 30 different feedbacks off of my main form, then all 30 of those processes that get invoked are now going to be tracked inside my routing slip. So is that how you want this to work? Now, in the case of the Q&A app that we looked at earlier, yes, that is how I want it to work. I do want to track, as inconveniently long as it might make my routing slip. And again, this is why we put the action buttons above the routing slip. As long as it may make my routing slip, my assumption on the Q&A process is that I actually want to see who asked and answered those questions. I do want to track it as part of my routing slip. For normal feedback, that may not be true. It's even more complicated if your main process already invokes a sub-process of some kind, either via a process timeline activity type or via the run process custom task. Those are actually sub-processes that I do want to show normally. So It's generally not a great idea to come in here and turn these off unless I just have no sub processes. Now, in that case, it doesn't really matter much how my uh, run process custom task is configured for those checkboxes. Yes, there are linkages that are made in the back end that you may or may not want, although the fact that those linkages exist are useful in many cases. But if I don't have any sub processes launched from my main process, well, then fine, I can probably just go in and uncheck that. And I'll just never see those sub processes. I don't think this is the best practice, though. I think you do want to keep the default. The existence of a feedback form should probably not make you change all of your main forms to turn off show sub processes. I think that's not a great idea. It's an option you have. So you can, depending on how you want it configured, you can do it that way. That would probably not be the recommended way. The recommended way would be, as soon as my form saves, would be to go back over here to our feedback form and, oh no. Oh wait, no, it's not the feedback form I have to care about. It's the main form. That's where my configuration is. That's where I'm calling it from. So to go back over here, do you want it launched as a sub process? So the answer is yes, if you want to track it as part of the main process timeline. So if you want to track it as a sub process, yes. If you don't want to track it as a sub process, the answer will be no, you don't want to do that. If you don't want to do this, the chances are that you don't want to do this either, because it's now beginning to look to me like your feedback sub process is not really a sub process. It's a child process because it gets invoked by a parent, but you don't want to have those connections. So on your parent process, you don't want to see the feedback forms. So that's the other wrinkle. What usually happens is when I invoke a sub process, what I usually do for a normal sub process, not this feedback thing, what I normally do is I pass the parent form instance down to the sub process to run as the default form instance for that sub process. And so therefore, when my sub process is invoked, the end user sees the parent form. Now, sometimes a sub process has a new form, or in a sub process, I may also add attachments or whatever. And so by default, what we want to do is also, if there is a new form associated, we want to send that back up to the parent process. So in the parent process, I have a reference to an instance of all of my sub process forms. And normally, if there are attachments associated with that, we would do the same down here to, attach the source form to the new process, pull attachments down, and obviously send attachments back up to the parent process. That's what our normal configuration is. In fact, we also have to go look at the process timeline. This does get a little more complex than just cowboying your way through creating a feedback form. So let's go into our options from our parent timeline. I thought that those were checked by default. I could be wrong. So let me real quick create a new process timeline, and we'll just call this a refrigerator, and we'll go in here. Okay, unchecked. Fine. So I was afraid that that was the default value. It doesn't appear to be. So it's fine, although you do need to be aware of those two checkboxes. Right there. Copy objects in the timeline package to parent and copy objects from the parent process to this timeline. So this setting also exists in the timeline itself as a default behavior for the timeline. So if you're running a feedback process and you don't want it to run as a sub process, you need to uncheck that. You also need to be sure that we are not passing copies of the parent form. This is really important if you're in any sort of regulated environment, right? So let's assume just for just as a hypothetical that you were building a feedback form for a law firm, just to pull an example out of my head. All right, the data on that parent form, whatever it may be highly proprietary, and only a few people can access that data. But then you decide to let some sort of junior dev play around with your feedback process. And they have access to all of the instances of the feedback process. So if these two buttons are checked, now, if your permissions are set up right, this should not happen, but nobody's perfect and it can. So if I've got that going on, or back over here, very confusing, switching back and forth all the time. If I have these set, then potentially somebody who is looking at an instance of the feedback timeline, because whenever you have a timeline instance running, everything that is attached to that timeline displays on that timeline. That means if I am passing the forms back and forth, my feedback form gets attached to my parent timeline, and my parent form gets attached to the child timeline. Then what happens? Let's go ahead and look at this Q&A process timeline as we careen back and forth around through what's going on here. I do have some completed timelines. I have some completed timelines here too. But that's fine. Let's look at the active timeline, the one that I kicked off this morning. Okay, so there we go. I've got questions asked and answered. Let's take a look at the timeline items. There's my question. Oh, you know what? I don't have a main timeline, so I can't do this on the main timeline. I can't do it. What I was expecting to see on the main timeline, which doesn't exist, is a copy of the Q&A form. So I guess I can't demonstrate that to you at this moment, but that is normally what would happen. Normally, when you go into a timeline and you go to references, it's going to show you all of the forms that are associated with that process timeline. Well, it will if you do it on a timeline instance. Let's go to completed timelines here. So if I go to timeline items, now in this case, I'm not passing the parent form down and back. I just have the link there. So the only thing that's associated with it is the question form here. But on the parent, if everything was linked up, what I should see is both the parent and the child timeline. I could probably look through here and find you an example that shows you that, but I'm not going to waste your time, hunting around through there. But just keep in mind that those copies of the parent and the child do get passed around. So you have to consider how you want this to work. Now, it may be that you want it to work that way, and I can't, there's no best practice, right? There's no answer of what is the best way to do this. You just have a lot of options on the way that you want to do it. So what you check in these advanced tabs, you may want to test around and play with it and see what is best for the scenario that you're using. And I know it's inconvenient to have to do that. It's best if you just know whether you want these three check boxes turned on or off. What is mandatory, though, is changing this after process starts checkbox. Because irrespective of what you do with all of this other stuff, that has back-end implications that concern you as an implementer or an administrator. This directly affects your user experience. And so this has to be set right, because the default for how the run process custom task works is for it to open up in the background. So you invoke the run process custom task. It starts off. Whoever needs a task assigned to them gets a task assigned to them. They get the proper email. They do their task. For a feedback deal like this, that's not how we want this to work. When I click that user feedback button, I'm going to need that form to appear instantly so that I can see that, oh, I now have to provide feedback. So I need to select Open Task from New Process in New Window. I do not want to save and close the original form. I don't want to cancel the original form. I want to open the task from a new process in a new window. We're going to completely separate my user experience with the new form from the parent form that has already been opened. So this is a very, very important checkbox to check because of how I want my process to work. And I want to have instant feedback from the user. So I think fine, we are okay here. And it's a good thing because it's 11:30 already. So we're fine here. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And now we're going to go back to our feedback timeline. And let's close that because we're fine on that. Let's go back over here to add feedback. Remember, this task is going to be assigned to the user automatically. Whoever invokes the save feedback or the submit feedback button. Whenever they do that, I have to assign a task to them so that I can show them the form. What I also want to do, and this is one of those rare cases where you do this, I do want to uncheck notify participants when activity starts. I think. Normally, I would do this because it's unnecessary. There's always the possibility of the user fumbling, in which case nothing of value is really lost other than perhaps the user not putting in their feedback. It's still going to go on their task list. I can't stop that, but I don't think I need to send them an email for a form that is going to pop open instantly whenever they click submit feedback. Also, the thing that I was just talking about just a second ago. Let's say the user flubs it badly. They click add feedback, they open the form, and then somehow they inadvertently close it. Okay, in that case, they haven't submitted anything. They may have lost whatever they were going to submit as feedback. But we're okay because this is a task that's assigned to them. So it's still going to show up in their task list. So they still have a task. They still have to complete it. Now, we probably should have provided a cancel button. So we may have to go back into our feedback timeline and address how we might handle an intentional cancellation. But there's always a fallback in the process itself because I'm assigning a task to them so that they can go back and go into their task list, reopen their feedback submission and complete it and then submit it properly. But I probably don't want to send them the email. I think that's probably a little irksome. Now, also, I guess it would be great if they do, mess up their submission and they inadvertently close it without saving it or what happened. Uh, I mean, then I guess they could go to their email inbox and reopen it real quick. But this seems kind of unnecessary. And this is one of the few times when you want to uncheck this box. Because in the normal course of events, what's going to happen is the form is going to open, they're going to click the button, and then the subform is going to open, they're going to submit it, and everyone is going to be as happy as a clam. So just something to think about whether you want that thing turned on. I have turned it off because of how I want my process to work, but if you're more of a belt and suspenders kind of person than I am, then maybe that's the best way to run it. So we'll just go okay. And I think at this point, assuming I've done everything right, and yeah, it's always a nerve-wracking experience to try to talk your way through something and to do it at the same time and to not miss anything. But we're going to go for it. We're going to run our webinar form. Okay, I don't have a feedback button. Good, shouldn't have one. Don't have a request number. Shouldn't have one either until I submit my form. Okay, now I've submitted my form. My request number is wrong because I am not using a custom variable. That is a parentheses. So I know that's wrong. And I'm not seeing my request feedback button. So I've got a little problem there. So let's go into our webinar form. Well, actually, let's go into our webinar timeline. We got to fix this. That needs to be a sequence number. So we'll go back to our custom task. And somehow I typed in a parentheses, not a curly bracket. Now that should be two curly brackets. That should create a sequence number. So that should fix that problem. So we're going to go ahead and close that and we'll hit OK. Fine. Let's go back to our webinar form. Let's just go to the Form Controls tab. Let's look at that feedback button. What have I done? Oh, well, apparently I didn't save something. So I have essentially just hidden the field. So apparently I did not properly save that condition. So form, new form instance equals yes. Okay. And otherwise visible. So we'll hit OK there. We'll hit OK there. Let's try this again. So once again, we'll run our webinar form. Everything is fine. We'll hit submit. Hey, look at that. What do you know? I've got a request number and I've got a give feedback button, which I can now click. And there is my feedback. I'm angry. So I've now got my feedback. Note, my original form is still here. And so now I can submit feedback. And now I'm the feedback recipient. I'm going to do whatever it is I'm supposed to do as the feedback recipient. Look, I've read it. We're done. Now, I kicked this thing off as a sub process. So please note, I've got add feedback showing up there as a sub process activity in my process timeline. So let me just go ahead and complete and complete. I have too many activities. So let's go back to my webinar form and let's make some changes to our configuration. And that's not where I want to be. I want to be on custom task event mapping. So let's go back here. Let's go to advanced. Well, actually, since we've done it, before we make the changes, let's go ahead and take a look at what we got here. So let's go back to our webinar timeline. I don't have an active timeline because I completed it. So let's go back to completed timelines. Notice what we have here. Feedback form submitted on, webinar form submitted on. So remember that example I couldn't show you just a few seconds ago? Now I can. So if I look at my routing slip, remember this was a sub process. This is what a sub process looks like if you have your feedback configured that way. So there's my add feedback activity, my receive feedback activity, and then there is activity 3, which is my main activity. So I'm showing everything because I invoked it as a sub process. Also, when I go to my timeline, I got 2 different forms attached to my parent timeline because I have my sub process form automatically gets imported back into the parent process so that I have access to both of those forms. The same thing would happen with attachments if I had configured attachments to be shuffled back and forth. For a feedback form, you generally don't want to do that. And if we go back and look at the feedback timeline, feedback form, webinar form. So this is the possible security or at least confidentiality issue that I was talking about earlier in my law firm example. So I might not have access to see what's going on in the parent form. But if I do have access down here, it is conceivably possible that I can go to my timeline items and go, oh, look, here is the main form. Hopefully you have a permissions methodology set up that will prohibit this. But now I can now open up my parent form and see potentially confidential information. Probably don't want that to happen. So let's go back and play around with our configuration and turn all bad things off. So we're going to go here and we're just going to uncheck those 2 boxes. And we're going to go here and we're going to uncheck that box. Then we're going to hit OK. And then we'll hit OK up here for our form. Now we'll run our form again. And we'll submit our form. There we go. We will now give some feedback on our form. So let's look back here on our parent form. I'm not seeing any feedback activities. Now I have, wait a second. Showing the wrong form. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. Let me go back to my configuration. Yeah, this is where doing things live is always fun. Let's go back to advanced. Oh, I do want to have set form as default form instance in this process because there's my new form, feedback form. I do want to check that. I don't want to check that. So that should solve my problem. Okay. So now let's try her again. Run, submit, give feedback. Thank you. There is my feedback form. I have no feedback showing up over here, which is exactly what I want. Now I want to go ahead and give my feedback. I will submit it. Now I am magically a different person who receives feedback. I have now read it. I will complete my receive feedback task. There we go. We're fine. We're going to go ahead and refresh our form. We're still showing activity 2. We will hit complete. We're now in activity 3. We are now done with our form. So let's go back and take a look at our completed timelines. Here is the second completed timeline that we will open up. Because I turned off the run as sub process, I'm no longer tracking my my feedback as a sub process of the main process, so it doesn't show up in any of my routing slips, unlike what we saw the last time. Now, I still have my webinar form here that is submitted. So I still have got that problem. So I've got to go back and configure that to turn that off. I thought I had done it, but apparently not. I may have to brute force this. So we go to advanced, set form as default form instance for process. That should work, but I don't want that. So well, yeah, I don't want to pass my parent form. So advanced, process is current, process starts. I don't want to do that. I'm trying to see where I'm missing. So it could be there. Again, I'm going to try to brute force this. So I'm going to turn that off. See, it now becomes much more complex when you're trying to run it as an independent process. And I don't want to pass this information back and forth. Like I said, permissions should fix it, but I want to see if I can do this without permissions. I may not be able to. Well, we'll see. I thought I could, but I might have been wrong. This is one of the things from doing this stuff like off the top of my head, because I am just making it up as I go along. Okay, so I don't have copy. Okay, great. So that's fine. Let's go to my webinar timeline. I don't have copy there. So let's go to my feedback timeline. And we're going to create another activity here. And we are going to move it up to the top. Well, I'm going to try to move it up to the top. And that's not what I wanted to do. Erg. Let me remove it. So what we're trying to do is brute force this. And I'll explain what I mean by brute force it, because now I'm thinking. So I want to change the move order. So that should change activity 3 to activity 1. Going to make activity 1 dependent on activity 3. And here, we're going to set this to a form actions activity. Our form options, we are going to set our form definition as our feedback form. Set it as the default form instance for the timeline. Okay. And we will call this set default form. And give me a second to do this because we are running out of time. And I'll try to explain it quickly, but I want to just get it done first before I explain it. Okay. So I've changed my feedback timeline. What I'm going to try to do is set my feedback form as the default form for the process timeline. And the reason that I'm doing that, and that will happen before the add feedback activity. And the reason I'm doing that It's because on my webinar form, I'm going to go back over here on my configure tab, and I'm going to try to ensure that everything is turned off. Now, I can't guarantee that this is not going to pass my parent form to the child process. I thought that I could uncheck those buttons and it would happen, but we may have changed the behavior of the product. It may be intentional. Not sure. I would have to check up on it. Again, I decided to do this very shortly before the webinar, so we're flying by the seat of our pants on this one. But there we go. I'm already in. There we go. Give feedback. Go. There's my feedback. I will submit my feedback. I will now accept my feedback. I will close it. I will now complete my parent process timeline. So let's go back to my completed timeline. Let's look at timeline. No, I can already tell you it's there. Okay, the webinar form is going to be there all the time. So we are going to pass that parent form down to the child. I'm not sure if that's intended behavior or not, because I thought I could turn that off. And I don't remember it working that way in the past. Now, it could be that I'm wrong because, this is one of those things that I don't do very often. Okay, so webinar form. All right. I am not entirely sure how this works from a security standpoint, and we just don't have enough time to test it. So now my concern would be who is going to have access to my feedback process. I think in most cases, it's going to be, a set number of implementers who all have the appropriate permissions to see stuff and who are, covered under the appropriate NDAs. So, you may see some information here that is confidential, but you're trusted to do so. If you have somebody who has access to your feedback process who shouldn't have access to the main form that gets passed, you might want to test to see about how permissions work in this case. Because when this gets passed, if I don't have view children permission on the form definition, I shouldn't have view permission on the webinar form itself. However, I don't know if the permissions that are set on your feedback process govern what I would see in my timeline instances, or whether the permissions that were set on the parent objects would govern what I see as far as the form instance itself. Because the initial webinar form instance, I might not have permission to see. So I'm not entirely certain how that works. That's something that you're going to have to test out and play with. I was also fairly certain, and again, we may have changed this recently, but I was also fairly certain that I could prevent my parent form from being passed to the child. Could be I'm wrong about that. This is one of those things that I kind of did on the spur of the moment and didn't really get a chance to study much ahead of time. Like I said, we're flying by the seat of our pants here. But it does surprise me that I cannot block out the parent form instance from the child instance. And as you saw, I tried to do it two different ways. So again, this is something you may want to play around with to see how that works. It may not be a concern for you. I was only bringing it up in case you had somebody who had access to the definition for the feedback form that wasn't supposed to see stuff in any of the actual form instances. I'm not sure how relevant that would be in the real world. Oh, let's turn that off. Attach source form to new process. And I think we can turn that back on. Set form default form instance for the process. Okay, let's go to our feedback timeline. Let's remove that activity and go back to status quo ante. Okay. Now let's go back to our webinar form, run, submit, give feedback, submit feedback, complete feedback, complete main form, activity 2, complete activity 3. Fine. Now let's go back to the feedback timeline. Let's look at time. Okay, there we go. I was just mistaken about the checkbox we needed to click. So now I only have access to the feedback form. So just to make it clear, the fix was on the Advanced tab, attach source form to new process. We do not, in fact, wish to do that. And so I was seeing the source form and I was getting very irked because I configured it incorrectly. So we're not going to launch it as a sub process, so we don't have to track it. It is a child process technically, but what we want to do is divorce it from the main process in this case. So we are going to turn off the attach new form to parent process because we don't want our child form stuck back onto our top. And we are going to turn off attach source form to new process because we don't want our parent form going down. I am pretty sure that this checkbox here used to be up here, right by attach new form to parent process. I'm pretty sure those two used to go together, but this says custom task version 2020-0303. So it's been this way for 6 years. So I'm just an idiot. Clearly, I did not remember what buttons went where. So those are the buttons that go where. This is the button you check to ensure that your source form doesn't get attached to the child process. I can't tell you how gratified I am that I remembered how to do that. In any event, long story short, this is how you create a feedback process. It's not super hard to do once you know what you're doing. And even for me, it wasn't hard to do this live, although as you can see, I'm not perfect at doing it, but it's not super difficult to do. And now that I have this feedback process, and now that I have it configured the way that I have, I can invoke this feedback from anywhere in Process Director. It's now a separate, independent process, and I can stick a, give feedback button on any other form in my process, as long as, you do have some value. In this case, it was the sequence number that you pass from your parent form to your child form, as we did in the configuration here. As long as I have those values that I can pass. So on both my parent form and on my feedback form, I have both source fields and the appropriate destination fields. I can use this anywhere, and I can pass those fields back and forth. And the nice thing is that because I do the configuration here in the run process custom task, then whatever these fields are, whatever they're named, it doesn't really matter as long as I can do the mapping back and forth. I've got the hooks that I need to, as somebody who is processing the feedback, to go back and look at the parent items if they have access to them. So the way I've got it configured now, it's not, I mean, Technically, it's a child process because it was invoked by a parent process, but there are no hooks now to the parent process. I'm not tracking it as a sub-process. It's not running as a sub-process. It's happening independently. There are no process timeline items being passed from the parent to the child or from the child back up to the parent. So it's relatively isolated. And so that's why these fields become important, because if I run it as an isolated feedback that I can just pull from anywhere, I've got to think a little bit about what data I need to pass to it to allow somebody who's handling the feedback. They need enough information to find the original item so that they can, provide the appropriate context for that feedback, especially if that feedback is relevant to a specific item. So in this case, I have a sequence number, and assuming that every request has a unique sequence number, you can kind of find it that way. You might want to pass along the request name or, some other data to help narrow down and filter it. But assuming that you do that, you can call this feedback from anywhere that you need to in your Process Director installation. So I'm very proud of myself. I saved myself from disaster by figuring things out. I like it when I figure things out. And I have figured out at this point that it is time to go. So we're going to go. Oh, and so Michelle, Pierre, this was for you. I hope you found it useful, even if the last 15 minutes of it I got a little off track. At least I was able to pull back on track and get it done. Have a great week. We'll look forward to talking to you next week. So long.